Welcome to the Cannabis Studio. In this video, I'll show you how I use my Macropad with Nomad Sculpt. I've been sculpting with a Macropad for a long time now, and sometimes I get questions on what I'm using, what my keys are, and so on. So I'm excited to finally dedicate a video for this. Regardless of whether you have a Macropad or not, I hope that this video will give you new insights of how I use mine with my sculpting workflow. Before I start, I'll show you what Macropad I'm using. I'll also talk about why I got this and factors to consider for getting a Macropad, so you can go ahead and skip this part if you just want to see the sculpting process. The timestamps are down below. So for those interested in the details of the Macropad itself, this is the iOrthai 2nd generation Procreate keyboard, and it's not a sponsored product. I got this on my own. So why did I choose this Macropad? I chose it simply because it has a cute color. It's also thin and lightweight with good battery life, so it's easy to carry this with me to sculpt outdoors. But I mainly got it because it looks cute. For additional context, I got this Macropad before I started sculpting. I was drawing in Procreate at the time, which was part of the reason I bought this in the first place. Since this Macropad was made for Procreate, the buttons are hard-coded to Procreate hotkeys. This key, for example, is B, this is L, this one is Command K, and I can't change the keys. That's why I have what looks like random key assignments for some of my tools, like backspace for wireframe toggle, or Command V for background transforms. So obviously I can use this Macropad for apps that don't have custom bindings, but because Nomad Sculpt is the best, we can assign custom hotkeys to almost any functions in the app. I can even use my Bluetooth keyboard as a large Macropad if I want to. When it comes to Macropad recommendations, I haven't tried that many, but I would highly recommend a Macropad with customizable keys. To look at the list of key bindings and make your custom hotkeys, we can find it by tapping the second icon from the top right corner and select the bindings icon here. I'll go through my macros now, starting with the modifier keys. These are essential for my workflow. Not only are they usable as hotkeys, I can combine them with other keys to create new sets of macros. First, I have the command key on the bottom right, which I've assigned to Smooth.shortcut. Take note that functions listed with dot shortcuts are referring to the shortcut buttons on the left toolbar. You can filter them all in the bindings menu by clicking the quick button up here. And there's another cool thing I can use this hotkey for. If I hold it down and drag anywhere outside of the current selection, I can do a lasso multi-selection. Another customizable feature for these quick functions, including the add sub bindings, can be found in the 3 dots menu on the right of each of them. You can see an extra option to toggle shortcut on key tab. By default, toggle shortcut on key tab is set to auto, but I switched them off for the add sub and smooth shortcut functions. Let me quickly show you what they do. I'll set my smooth shortcut back to auto again to demonstrate this, and I'll set the current tool to the default brush. By selecting auto, Nomad Sculpt will determine if you want to toggle or switch the function completely depending on how you make the key press. Now when I do a quick key press, it acts like a button switch. So my tool will switch to the smooth tool, and I can use the smooth tool as long as I want, and make a key press again to switch back to the brush tool. When I long press the command key, it acts like a toggle instead. So while holding the key, I'm in the smooth tool, and once I let go, it goes back to the brush tool. The reason why I switched this option off is because I always use smooth as a toggle anyway. So to put the smooth hotkey into practice, I can draw with a different tool like the brush tool, and then hold down command to smooth my sculpt. It's just click and smooth, click and smooth. Something else to note, long pressing command key will bring up the iPad OS shortcut list. I wish that I can turn this off, but the next modifier key on my Macropad is the option key. It's located down here. I use this key for my viewport navigation. In the bindings menu, I can click on the view icon to filter the viewport functions. I have translation and snap view while rotating assigned to this key. Also have option open bracket assigned to zooming. And I'll jump ahead and demo the zooming hotkey together with the translation and snap view and show you how they work together. So when I use my finger to drag around the screen, by default it rotates my view. Dragging my pen does not affect the camera view because I've disabled stylus for camera manipulation in the gesture menu. And I've explained this in detail in my Basics of Symmetry video. I'll link the video above. Now when I hold the option key down, instead of rotating, the finger drag turns into camera translation. Dragging my pen does the same too. And if I press option down while I'm rotating the camera, it will snap my view to the nearest orthographic view. So I can snap this to front view or rotate upwards to snap it to top view. That's what the snap view while rotating function does. But that's not the best part. If you have been using orthographic view for a while, you may notice that it's difficult to stay in orthographic view. It will go back to perspective view, and I'll need to switch it back to orthographic view again. To fix that, you can click on the lock icon beside the snap cube. Now my viewport camera is locked, and I can translate or zoom in the current view I'm in. But this icon is a bit out of the way, and I need to click it again to unlock the camera. So let me show you what I do instead with my macros. I can rotate the view, hold down the Option key as I rotate to snap to orthographic view, and without releasing the key press, I can drag around again to navigate in orthographic view. How cool is that? I can then combine it with the open bracket key to activate zooming, and now I can zoom in and out of my viewport. I can easily switch to side view, for example, then do the same key presses to get to exactly where I want to sculpt. Orthographic view navigation is now so easy with these hotkeys. I love them so much, and it's hard to go back to a time when I didn't have them. I highly recommend you to give them a shot. For both Command and Option keys, I can combine them with other keys to create new key bindings. I can even combine Command and Option together for a new set of hotkeys. On my Macropad layout, the ones listed in yellow are Command key combos, the ones in blue are Option key combos, and the greens are combos of both. For the purpose of this video, I'll call the Command key combos as second layer, Option combos as the third layer, and finally Command and Option combos as the fourth layer macros. As mentioned earlier, some of my buttons are already hard-coded with key combos, like the Command key here, so I can't assign different layers for them, and that's why 5 of my keys have single functions only. So it's better to have a customizable keyboard so that you don't have issues like this. Let's move on to the other macros now. By the way, when I introduce a new macro, I will show you where you can find it on the screen right here. Starting from the top left corner, this key is mapped to visible on and off. This hides any object selected, and it works for multiple selections too. I know that I wouldn't be sculpting the animals for now, so I can hide them away. It's nice to have it to quickly hide objects when I need to. Next is Cam Focus. This frames the selected object in the middle of the viewport, and a second click will frame all the objects in the scene. There's a way to change the focus behavior in the camera tab up here. Scroll all the way down until you see the double tap on background checkbox. Next is the dynamic topology toggle. This is probably one of my most used macro because of my sculpting style. I toggle dynamic topology depending on the tools I'm using or the sculpting action I'm doing. I'll have a dedicated tutorial on how I use dynamic topology in the future. On the same key, I have the Symmetry toggle on the second layer. I've mapped the dynamic topology and symmetry toggle hotkeys together because their shortcut buttons are placed together. I like to use logic like this to remember where my hotkeys are. I've already gone through how I use symmetry in my symmetry tutorial, so let's move on to the next key. The third layer is Mask Tool. I use this to mask areas I don't want to sculpt on. I also like to use masking for extracting shapes. It's a pretty cool and fast way to make specific shapes, like using the shape of the eyelids to create eyelashes. The last key on the top row is assigned to Wireframe toggle. This displays the wireframe of the objects. I have the X-ray toggle as the second layer. This toggles the X-ray mode. Pretty straightforward stuff. The third layer is mapped to Next Cam. Let me show you how I use this. If I create a few camera angles around my scene, I can use the Next Cam function to cycle through them. But there's something else I use cameras for now, and that is to save the viewport position for my save file thumbnails. In my previous files organization tutorial video, I talk about how I intentionally create these thumbnails for organization purposes. To make it even easier, now I do an extra step of creating a camera once I've set the thumbnail image that I want. So I can change the viewport angle to sculpt the areas that I want to, and when I want to save my work in progress, I can simply click on my Next Cam hotkey to frame my viewport in the same way and save the work in progress with the same thumbnail. In the next row of my Macropad, the first key is mapped to save. It's at a convenient spot that's easy to reach, so I can save as many times as I want while working on my sculpt. Again, all the details on my file saving workflow are in the Files tab tutorial, so I'll move on. On the second layer, I have Pane Visibility toggle, and the third layer is Reference Image toggle. I paint my sculpts all the time now, even when the sculpt is halfway taking shape, so the Pane toggle is a must-have for me. Reference Image toggle can be found in the Background tab under this checkbox. You can select the image you want to display, and I can hit my macro to show or hide the selected image. The next button is mapped to the default brush tool. I use this tool in two ways. In the block-in phase, it's a great way to block out shapes quickly. The second way I use the brush tool is to draw my sculpt in the refinement phase. To me, this feels quite similar to painting with a default round brush on the canvas, the difference being that I have to be mindful of the 3D space. Even with different sculpting styles, you can't go wrong with the default brush tool, so the button I've assigned it to is quite accessible. Moving on to the second layer of the same button is Command Spacebar, which unfortunately is already mapped to the iPad Spotlight. The third layer is Invert Mask. I'll show you how I use it in a second. Moving on to the next button, the first layer is Planar Tool. I use this to flatten things sometimes, but I use it to draw too. In my experience, it really shines on curved areas. It's pretty fun to use this. I can create some interesting shapes and patterns. And depending on the angle the camera is facing on the surface, the result can be quite different. Next, I have a custom brush, Planar Text, on the second layer. This is the same as the default Planar tool, but with a different alpha channel selected. Honestly, I haven't used this that much, but I've been using it to create scratch marks on surfaces like this. Finally, the third layer is mapped to SelMask Tool. I'll do a quick demo of how I use the SelMask Tool, Invert, and Clear All Mask hotkeys together. They are all mapped to the third layer of these 4 keys. When I want to mask an area, I usually start with SelMask first to block out the shape. Then I use Mask Tool to refine the edges if I need to. Sometimes it's easier to mask the inverse area. Then I use the Invert Mask hotkey to invert it afterwards. Now I can adjust the edge of the hair, push it out a little bit more to create some depth. Finally, I have Clear All Mask. This clears any existing mask on all objects in the scene. The last key of the second row is mapped to the Add Sub toggle. It's one of the hotkeys that I use the most, especially when I start adding details like the pattern on her tail fin. As mentioned earlier, I switched the toggle shortcut on key tab off. The second and third layers are assigned to the split and trim tools. I'll go through this in more detail in my Symmetry tutorial part 3. For now, I'll quickly show you how I use them. I use the split tool to create new shapes quickly, like hair strands for example, and trim tools to remove areas quickly, like this extra hidden chunk on her torso. Now let's go through the third row. I have the drag tool on the first key, which I probably use the most. I use it to sculpt, move things around, rotate objects or patterns, drag out more polygons with dynamic topology. It's an incredibly versatile tool. The second layer is assigned to grid visibility. It toggles the floor grid along with the orthographic view grids. In my Scale Armor tutorial, I use the orthographic grids to organize my spline points. It's super useful for straightening the splines or tubes tool. And as mentioned in my Basics of Symmetry tutorial, it's so important to keep your scene organized and make sure that your objects are in the center of the scene. I've already gone through the third layer camera zoom controls, and the fourth layer is the custom paint tool. I'll talk about all the paint tools together at the last section of this video. This button with the C decal is mapped to another one of my top used tool, the Crease Tool. Similar to the brush tool, I mainly use this for drawing, or use a large radius to pinch things. The crease and brush tools have their pros and cons, so I use them together often for my sculpts. The brush tool to create more distinct shapes, and crease tool to sharpen the edges and polish the sculpt. The second layer is the Inflate Tool. I mapped this here because it feels like the opposite of crease. I mainly use this for inflating volumes. You can do something similar with the brush tool, but you see that the brush tool will create these edges that you need to smooth out. It's also useful for inflating thin meshes. The fourth layer is Flatten Tool. It's useful for flattening things and creating plane changes for a stylized look. Finally, these 2 keys with the arrow symbols are my undo and redo hotkeys. If you ask me, why should I get a Macropad? This is why you should get one. If I only have 2 keys on my Macropad, it's gonna be mapped to undo and redo. There's nothing like making quick undos and redos with physical key presses. Just 4 keys left. The X key is mapped to tool radius. When I hold this button down and drag my pen, it allows me to adjust brush size dynamically. If I only have 3 keys on the Macropad, tool radius with dynamic drag functionality will be my third key binding. The second layer toggles the post-process mode. If you've been following me for a while, you know how much I use the post-process tab to adjust the look of my viewport. I'll talk about the paint tools later, so let's move on to the next key, which is the solo view key. I typically use this when I want to focus on sculpting a specific object. I can also use the multi-select hotkey to select multiple objects, and then isolate them in solo view. It's also useful for sculpting at intersections or the bottom layer of a multi-layered sculpt. The second layer is Hide Tool. Since the bulk of her hair is just one object, I used the Hide Tool a lot when I was working on her hair. With the Hide Tool activated, I can lasso out specific areas of a mesh to hide them. When I'm done with my sculpt in the hidden areas, I can use the third layer binded to hide clear all to bring everything back into view. The next key is the Gizmo.shortcut. I can use this to bring out the object's gizmo to move, rotate, and scale them. And if I hold the Add Sub key while in gizmo mode, I can adjust the pivot point of the object. It's important to bind the Gizmo.shortcut version instead of the Gizmo tool. I'll show you why. When we are in the spline mode for tubes, curve, repeaters, things like that, we can click on this icon here to toggle between spline edit mode and gizmo mode. With the Gizmo.shortcut hotkey, we can toggle the same button with the Macropad. But if we bind the gizmo tool instead, I can activate the gizmo mode, but I can't switch it back to the spline mode. So I recommend binding this Gizmo.shortcut function right from the start. The second layer is assigned to reference image transform, which is listed as background transform here. When used in combination with the reference image toggle hotkey, I can transform my reference image anytime I want. I wish that we can display multiple image files instead of just one, but I'm pretty happy with how intuitive it feels to move the image around my viewport. The fourth layer activates the turntable. With this hotkey, you can start the turntable animation anytime you want, and 4-finger tap is the default gesture to hide the UI. Finally, we have the lit PBR mode toggle. If you have the lit PBR and MacCast shortcuts in the bottom row, you may notice that both shortcuts allow you to toggle between the two modes. So you only need one of them on the shortcut bar, and the same applies for hotkeys. You only need to assign lit PBR or MacCap for it to work as a toggle. How cool is that? It's finally time to talk about the remaining paint tools. I'll show you how to create them first before I explain how to use them. I'll start with the paint text tool. Let's clone the default paint tool. Choose any of the default alpha channels. I quite like this one. I can now use this as a simple texture paintbrush. To create the Paint 22 tool, I'll duplicate the default paint tool again. I will call it Paint Test 22. And this time around from the top right bar, click on the brush icon to open the strokes menu and click on the filter tab. It will be changing Keep Sharp Edges this time. I'll create a new cube to show you how this function works. For this demo, I'll be painting on a single cube face with a large tool radius. I'll paint a distance away from the edge of the cube, but the radius should be big enough to go over the other two faces. So by default, the paint tool will paint on all three edges if the cursor is large enough. You can see that even though I'm just painting here, the color bleeds out to the neighboring faces. If I set the Keep Sharp Edges to 91 degrees, I get the same result. Now when I set this to 90 degrees, which matches the angle difference of the cube faces, see what happens when I paint this again. Only the vertices connected to this face are painted. I can push the result even further by setting the Keep Sharp Edges to a low angle. Essentially, the angle we set here prevents vertices whose normal differ more than that, in this case more than 90 degrees, from being painted on. This creates a cool effect when applied to detailed meshes like this one. I feel like the location and the way this slider works is not really ideal. That's why I have all these variations saved to quickly step up and down a few degrees. So Paint 22 just means 22 degrees, 15 is 15, 10 and so on. So try this on your scalp, see how the paint looks with different angles, and if you like that result, save that number on your brush. I'll end this video with a bonus tip, and it's on the bindings I've assigned for my Apple Pencil Pro. I have the Pick material on Apple Pencil Squeeze. This is nice for eyedropping materials quickly, and I can even eyedrop on my reference image colors, which is pretty cool. Next, I have Command key with Squeeze to activate the default paintbrush, and Option Squeeze brings up the Smudge tool. If you don't have the Apple Pencil Pro, you can easily map these hotkeys to your Macropad instead. That marks the end of this video. These hotkeys are not set in stone. I've already changed them a couple of times and I might change them again in the future. But in the most part, the functions and tools on my Macropad are what I find myself reaching out for many times. My advice to you for creating your own set of macros is to simply sculpt a lot. The more you sculpt, the more you notice which tools you enjoy using and what workflow patterns you default to. Then you can use the information to organically build a Macropad system that you enjoy using. If you just got a Macropad, I hope that this video will act as a starting point for your own design. I'm interested to know what your favorite hotkeys are too, so comment down below to let me know. I'll see you in the next one.